Hello, thank you for joining me. We'll look at the Lucy Letby press conference that happened yesterday. In essence, to sum it up, there's no evidence of any evidence of wrongdoing. Sounds like an oxymoron. It's quite a crazy situation. There never was any evidence, there was a belief. This is my main point. The belief was in a person called a doctor, that conflates and inflates somebody's opinion. Oh, the doctor said the nurse did it, therefore she must have done it. So this doctor has also called themselves an expert when they're not a neonatologist. They didn't have a practicing license certificate at the time. They're well retired, and they conjured up various scenarios without any evidence, obviously, but even without any scrutiny or proper rationale. To say that Lucy Letby had injected air, she'd given insulin, she'd put the air either in the nose or down a vein, and there was no evidence. But they said, well, if she didn't do this, she must have done that. And because the person's title is doctor, police look up very much to doctors, too often, too much. And he's not really credible, as the press conference shows. These are international, global experts from around the earth. The main doctor from Canada, doctors from England, doctors from all over, who, for no money, whereas the expert working for the police got perhaps millions. I don't know exactly, they won't say. What does this show us about the systems? The systems are run by individuals, by people. So the people in the police, at first, they didn't know there was a crime, but once the expert told them there was, they ran with that, and it built. And the doctors in the hospital were very happy to have a scapegoat because people wouldn't look at their failings, and there were many failings. They didn't understand the equipment they were using, resuscitation techniques, the ventilation settings, whether it was too high, too low, too fast, and these things caused problems. And this has been analysed properly by other clinical experts, so this is a peer review by the other experts. Now, the doctors at Countess of Chester working with the babies themselves were not all neonatologists. I'm not sure if any of them were. They're paediatricians who are specialising with babies, premature babies, and their physiology is very different. When you've just been born, you still inherit things from the labour and the birth. So in one case, the baby whose mother had a particular blood disorder, the baby inherits that and makes blood clots too easily or doesn't clot enough. So when you put a tube in a line with IV fluids and you have it running for hours and it's come out of the blood vessel, because they're tiny, very difficult, the size of a hair almost, some of the blood vessels. And you put a tube in one of these and it can tissue. Nobody's fault, it happens. But you should be observing it at least every hour or sooner. That was my job, I did this. And you make sure it's visible, check it. They didn't observe one baby for many hours. The fluid went in the tissues, and then when they restarted it in the right place, there was a blood clot that went to the brainstem and killed the baby. They then say, oh, she happened to be on duty, she killed the baby. Zero evidence. So this whole press conference shows there's no evidence of evidence against Lucy Letby. There's plenty of evidence against the systems that failed her and failed the families and failed the babies and are failing us, the citizens. So I'm going to go through three main steps. There's medical negligence. It happens, there are mistakes, but was it so reckless that it caused somebody to die? Then that becomes manslaughter. Negligence only requires a duty of care for that care to be breached and to have suffered harm. Some of that harm could also include the parents. They're secondary victims, like in the Hillsborough tragedy, the police who caused the tragedy by locking certain gates. People got stampeded, 100 people virtually died, and many injured, when the other police were rescuing and saving and treating dying and rescuing dead people from the stampede. They suffered secondary trauma, psychiatric injury. Now, the parents of a baby who's died in these circumstances has suffered a lot of shock, trauma, depression, all sorts of triggers come up for them, no doubt. So they are victims of this, and they could be suing in the civil courts on the balance of probability that the hospital failed in its duty of care to them, that the doctors failed in their duty of care to them. They breached that duty to them as secondary victims and to their babies as primary victims. And that would mean there's some damages for them. But it's really about lessons to learn. And we were not learning lessons with a narrow public inquiry that was not really serving the public. It was serving the judicial person who was running it, had a narrow remit in a difficult position, but they could and should serve the interests of justice. They were clearly not doing that. So that's Lady Thirlwell. There's a direct criticism of me to you, and I welcome you to agree or disagree and engage with me. I have criticisms of the judges in the Court of Appeal. They also are bound to focus on justice. And when you say, evidence could and should have been put before the judge or the jury, and it wasn't, tough luck, you missed your chance. No, the evidence was withheld on purpose by the prosecution. We've seen this in another case, the Andrew Malkinson case, 17 years in jail, when after a very short time, 2 or 3 years, evidence was available to show the Court of Appeal that that was a miscarriage of justice. They denied his appeal several times before finally it was too obvious. They had to look at the case again, and they've released him of 17 years. There's another person, I think 27 years, Dowding, his name, Stephen Dowding. And there was a woman associated with the IRA bombings, and they knew very quickly she had nothing to do with it. The police fabricated things. So these systems have people failing in them. The police have a belief in doctors and expert doctors. They're ones. They could and should have gone to a wide number of global experts or UK experts and see what do they agree on, what do they not agree on, and then present this to the court. The judge was wrong. That's James Goss. I don't hold him in any high esteem. He may have done some good work, like Denning did great work. Denning also did bad work. Denning is a landmark judge in the UK history back in the 70s, 80s. My mentor was mentored by him when I was studying law, and he lived in a local village to us, and he was a good upstanding person. He also got things wrong. So these judges, and Judge Goss was warned by another judge not to take the evidence of a rogue expert witness, Dewey Evans, the Welsh paediatrician who had long retired and never worked as a proper neonatologist, although he did, with respect, work with premature and sick babies and did have some good knowledge about that. But he had fanciful ideas not based on rationale or evidence. And we can see from these 14 experts that there is no evidence of evidence. When a baby has a blood clotting disorder, you're putting lines into either the umbilicus, making mistakes sometimes or not, into venous access in the arm. If you dislodge a clot and it travels around to the base of the brain, you get a brainstem injury and death, and that happens to some babies. And it's difficult to show this on post-mortem, but these are experts looking at all the clinical evidence saying this appears to be the cause of death in this one, this one, this one, natural causes, even the pathologists at the time, natural causes. The whole thing was concocted from a fanciful person whose grip on reality is in question. That's Dewey Evans. But why did the police? And it's because they had a belief. They just went along with the belief. They're not that well educated, understandably, in medicine. However, reading about the law is from a book. Reading about medicine is from a book. Anybody can pick up these books. It may take you years. Lucy Letby has been jailed for very many years. And people could and should have done due diligence and checked what were the facts, what were the rationales, where's the evidence? What if this, what if that? Could it have been something else? Because there was no evidence she harmed babies. Rather, now there's evidence that the medical staff there made errors, puncturing the liver, putting catheter into the umbilical artery in a way that caused harm and damage to the baby, endotracheal tube, size 2 instead of perhaps a size 3 or 3.5. Probably a 3 could and should have been used. Lack of airway maintenance, so if 90+% is escaping, the baby's not getting ventilated, there's no chest rising, what's the point? There's no CO2 being blown off. They could and should have measured this. They failed all these things. They didn't know what they were doing. I've worked in maybe 30 units. I've never come across such incompetent doctors. I have seen doctors out of their depth, lack of training, lack of supervision, and we've called somebody senior to come and help them. And they've saved the day. That's the job of a consultant. These consultants were the ones to come and step in and help the mid-level doctors, but the consultants didn't have the skills, the knowledge. They didn't even know what they didn't know. So that's a problem. I'm challenging myself, doing trainings and learnings. I work with groups and individuals, whether it's to do with childbirth or law or medicine generally, and we're all learning and stretching ourselves. What if I'm wrong? Is there another possibility? Let's talk to somebody else, get their opinion. Let's agree, let's disagree. All this was failed. We just had the wheels in motion. There's a prosecution started. We're not going to stop it. They suddenly get all the funding for both the hospital and for the police that they didn't have before. Millions and millions and millions. The prosecution got more money than the defence. For whatever reason, the defence did not call an expert witness. So on one side you've got Julie Evans and a few colleagues like Sandy Bohin from Guernsey, and they kind of, I don't know if they colluded, conspired, but they certainly just agreed with their mates and with each other on very weak, flimsy ideas that were not evidence. Oh yeah, she could have done that, because the wheels were set in motion. And the mass media, the mainstream media, still today, the day after the press conference, is pushing the wrong agenda. I don't know why they do this. There were other really good media like Unheard, The Telegraph, The Guardian, Sweeney podcast, Private Eye, Dr. Phil Hammond. There's statistician Richard Gill and another one, Nigel, on the Sonia Poulton show. So quite a few things, and we were all seen as the conspiracy theorists, the minority. Actually, here's the evidence, both evidence of no evidence and evidence of failings in the system and people. So who should be liable for this? Well, Crown Prosecution, the police, even the judge. Judges are protected. But I said earlier, I'm going to go in 3 steps. We've got medical negligence, we've got potential manslaughter. Was there murder by anybody? No, there wasn't any intent, I'm sure. But crimes against humanity is something I'm happy for us to agree or disagree on. I can't imagine anybody wanting to really think there are crimes against humanity. But why have we got over 500 miscarriages of justice in the UK for criminal cases, and then thousands and tens of thousands of miscarriages of justice in regulatory and other cases that don't get a criminal conviction, but the impact is very similar? Somebody loses their personal, professional reputation, their income, their ability to work with vulnerable adults or children, to do charity work, teaching work, expert witness work, as I do. I've just put a book out on expert witness, and some of it relates to this case. I have the first book out on Lucy Letby, Is She Innocent? Second book, clearly she is innocent, but looking at the miscarriages of justice, what went wrong with all the systems. And I don't shy away from culpability, liability, of targeting judges. Now, the very good KC, in this case Mark MacDonald's very softly spoken and polite and not criticising anybody. He just wants to get Lucy free. That is the number one criteria for this. I want lessons to be learnt because it's repetitive. We've had all this. We had the Law Commission 15 years ago recommend having a panel of experts. Why isn't it happening? Lack of motivation. Now we need to embarrass people like the Home Secretary, the government, whichever one's in power at the time. They need to implement the Law Commission's recommendations on expert witnesses in these criminal cases to prevent further miscarriages of justice. There are at least 4 or 5 other nurses in similar situations in jail at the moment. What about them? Who's going to look at their cases? Because it's not neonatal, it doesn't tug at the heartstrings so much. There's probably more attention on this case because it's about babies, and that's more emotional. So when we have an emotional connection to something, we're much more invested in it and interested. So I wrap it up here. Thank you for watching. I welcome comments. I welcome people to agree and disagree. I welcome invitations. I make invitations to you and others to come and talk with me. Anyone that I've disagreed with is very welcome.